Hey there. Welcome to the 21 Clear podcast, where we talk about anything to help you chaos-proof your family business so you can build a great company with a strong family around it. I'm your host, Adam Hatcher, drawing on 13 years as an executive scaling my own family's company and a lifetime of experiences around the business and a chance to learn from a lot of other family companies as well. And today, we're going to go to part 2 of an episode that we started last time. And so in episode 4 of the podcast, I laid out the family business framework, a strategic or a practical way of looking at doing work on your inner family business, how you and your family members interact with each other, how you work together, hire, how you exit the business, how you run ownership meetings. We looked at the framework in episode 4. In episode 5, we took one of those ideas, how to chaos-proof hiring family members or not hiring them. We took one of those ideas and we spent more time on it. And I did that by sharing the first part of a webinar that I was hosted at by Kennesaw State University's Family Enterprise Center. This episode, we're going to share the second half of that webinar. When you go back and listen to episode 5, you'll hear us talk about the importance of creating family hiring criteria. Those are those things that any family member who wants to join the company needs to do before they're even considered for a job. Has nothing to do with a position in the company. It is, do you have to graduate from college, from graduate school? Do you need to work somewhere else? Can you have an arrest record? Are there certain parts of the company's core values you have to agree with? Those are specific criteria for family members before they join. That's part 1 of the chaos-proof hiring of family. This episode, we're going to get into the last 3 elements. It's going to be matching family members to real jobs. Then it's going to be, if you followed the whole process to this point, not doing it, not joining the family company. And you'll hear me explain that a bit more. And then lastly, family members do not know how to work in the company just because they grew up together. They do not learn it by osmosis. What does it look like to vigorously onboard family members into their actual job so that they can be successful in the company and not put pressure on the family business? That's what we're going to do in this episode, and I hope you enjoy exploring a bit more how to chaos-proof hiring family. Now, let's go to step 2 of chaos-proofing family hiring or hiring family members well. And that is, once they pass the family hiring criteria, you need to match them to an actual job. And let me just go ahead and say up front that director of this economy is scary is not an actual job. Director of I don't want to go find something else is not an actual job. And while those are funny examples, I can also tell you about a family business that hired their son into a sales role. But they brought in outside investment and had limited ability to affect the compensation plan in their own organization. But they wanted their son to make significantly more than other employees. And so what they did in the sales role was they made him, where everyone else had a territory, he did not. Where everyone else had a restriction on how they sold, particularly not taking clients from others, he did not. And his position allowed him to take business from other salespeople to be able to make more money. Sometimes director of this economy is scary, is funny. It is dangerous, in fact, to the organization to let family members join the company when they do not have an actual job. And you know your job is real if the job has a name that I could look up in a salary software. I spent 7 years as the head of human resources in our company. I know there are jobs that are in salary softwares and there are jobs that are not. So the first thing, your family member needs a job that's in there. Second, they need to actually have results that they are responsible for. I worked with a phenomenal marketing team in our family's company, But I don't know why so many family businesses like to hire family members into part or full-time marketing roles with no descript job other than to make fun and snark other people and pay them $80,000 a year. I don't know why it's marketing. I don't know why that's the number. But if it's a real job, you can name the job and the job has actual results. And then lastly, you know it's real if you can imagine telling the family member why they're going to be good at the role, selling them on it. I saw a great example of this a few years ago. A second-generation CEO in a manufacturing company. His son was about to graduate from Clemson University. So my apology to our Georgia Tech and Georgia graduates on this. But it was a good story out of Clemson. Second generation, he had bought his parents out, and his son was about to graduate from Clemson. They were growing the company, and their competitive difference was the quality of their product. And they had to increase first pass yield as they were scaling the company. So what the CEO wanted to do, the second generation CEO, he wanted to hire entry-level engineers to put around his more senior engineers that had particular focus on quality and could run particularly quality improvement projects to increase first pass yield. That's what he wanted to do as part of selling it. And his son had both been successful at Clemson, had worked an internship in a quality department during his college years. And when he applied to the family company, they were able to hire him into an entry-level engineering role with a quality focus and give him his part of this target of increasing the first pass yield and the quality of the company, and thus making it successful. It was a job so tailored to what he was good at that his father could tell him exactly why he was going to be successful. And that's a very normal practice in human resources, to have a tight job and a tight fit. And just for some reason in family companies, there's this temptation where we can just let someone drift in. But when you do this, when you have clear family criteria and you match people only to actual jobs so clear you could sell them on why you think they'll be successful in it, you have set the family members and the company up for success. Otherwise, you have left them to blow in the wind, and maybe it'll work, it won't. And when it doesn't work for a family member, that is that unnecessary chaos we're trying to avoid. So steps 1 and 2, family criteria, actual job. If both of those are true for a family employee that you're considering hiring, or if you're a family member considering joining the family business, the next thing I would tell you to do is to say no to the opportunity. Why would I say that? There was a good article in the Wall Street Journal, this was back in April. Rachel Wolf's a writer for them. She has an interest in family companies. And she wrote an article, you can see it here, about people coming out in a scary economy and wanting to go work for their parents instead. And so I have a podcast and a newsletter, and somebody that was a subscriber to one of them asked me, if you got to talk to one of these folks, what would you tell them? What is the first piece of advice you would give a young family member considering joining their family company? And I said, it would be simple. If they had family hiring criteria that they had met, there's an actual job, I would tell them, don't do it. Do not work together. Go work somewhere else. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a good idea, but it's the exact opposite of drifting into the company because everything else is scary. So why not? Why would I tell your family members to not join the company? First, there's a risk. I remember my father telling me as we reflected back on years together, he said, I knew when I hired you the risk I was taking. Because as we talked about earlier in the webinar, every family member you hire, you're adding more unconditional family into a conditional environment, creating more and changing tension that's going to move and evolve with you over time in the life cycle of the family business. So you are constantly taking a risk. And the other thing you're doing when you hire family, or when you let them work for you or you go work, is you're asking your family or giving them permission to form a fully integrated view of your character. They might know you as the funny uncle. They might know you as the ballerina. They might know you as the kind grandfather. But when you invite them to work with you or you go work with them, you're opening yourself up to a complete evaluation of your character. And that is a risk that you're taking that you actually don't know when you go work with family or they work with you what you're going to see. You don't know until you work together if your aunt's a poor decision maker. You don't know if you have family members as wonderful, as generous of gift givers as they may be at Christmas. When you work with them, do they actually put their interests above the family's? Or do they put the family above the customers and the company versus always putting customers and company first and then family and themselves? You don't know that till you work together. I had one view of my grandfather when he and I worked together. And when I worked in the family company, I realized he had a very different and a tough management style. I would have never known that unless we worked together. And he likely learned a couple of things about me in the few years that we worked together too. Anywhere else you could work in the world other than your own family's company, you don't take these risks of inviting your family to create a fully integrated view of your character. And so because of that risk and because of that tension, when you work in a family company, you create this family business or you make it bigger by being another family member that joins, there is a requirement of you to work and run the family business in addition to the company. I had about 15 different jobs for free pay or credit before I came to work in our own family's company. And they were complex, they were challenging, but none of them required me every day to run two different organizations, a family business and an outer company. But when you join the family business, that's what you're signing up for. So I would tell someone, even if you meet the criteria and have an actual job, the next thing is don't do it. Don't drift into this because there are big risks and unknowns you're taking on and requirements you're accepting. But if eyes wide open, you see that, you know that, and you're willing to take it on, the last step in chaos-proofing your family hiring is to vigorously onboard new family members. Let's juxtapose that word vigorous. There is a temptation when you onboard to believe that family members, they were around you growing up. They probably picked it up by osmosis. I talked to a second generation family executive and the next generation was with them, sons, nieces, nephews, and they used that word with me. They said, well, I mean, Adam, they understand by osmosis. Like just because they came to Thanksgiving, it doesn't mean you know how to handle particular client relationships. And just because you remember to text everybody on their birthday doesn't mean you know how to do a performance review. It's lunchtime, so I'm allowed to do this. Just because you know the family lasagna recipe doesn't mean someone knows how to complete a budget shell or that they can recite a core value, and nor are they expected to just because they know the recipe. But once you're hired, that's the responsibility that you take on. And so what are components when we say vigorous onboarding? I think of that with three components. First, it's a written plan. Second, if you are able to, you provide them a broader view of the organization through job rotation. And third, you introduce them to the family employees uniquely. So first, to a written plan. When I joined the company, very different. Purposeful onboarding is not done walking down the hallway in passing conversations. In our company, we had a multi-page, multi-month onboarding for staff and a similar multi-page, multi-month onboarding for leaders. Two separate onboarding checklists. I joined as a general counsel, as an individual contributor. So can you guess what written plan my father gave me? Yeah, some of you, I know it. He gave me both. I was going to do everything up front. And whatever your list is, if you are about to hire a family member, if you're about to join, write down the onboarding plan. Work with human resources, work with a consultant. Talk with me afterwards. I'm happy to tell you how we broke down, because I had to go through different departments and functions. We're a staffing and recruiting company. I had to do 10 drug screens and sit for a half day with the receptionist and then go work on a client and a prospect proposal with finance. You want them to go through a written list to introduce them to the organization. Assume they hadn't worked there. I had actually worked there in high school in entry-level receptionist functions. None of that prepared me for joining as a leader in a high-pressure role like general counsel. So write down the plan. Second, if you can, and this is not something I did, but something some of the best, and we did this with my brother, and something some of the best family businesses I've seen, as best you can, provide them a job rotation. If you can put them through, if your organization is of a size to put them through operations, finance, sales, human resources, I mean, that's just an example, over a year. Great. I saw a very large family organization who one of their now family executives started in a franchise, and then they went into franchise selection, and then they went into one corporate function, and then they moved into another corporate function. And they had the luxury of a larger organization where they could move. But even if you can give someone the time to shadow roles for weeks or months at a time to get their hands in and learn before they have their own job responsibilities, it will help them understand the organization. It also gives them the message, family to family, I didn't expect you to know all this. I remember one of the hard things joining your family company, I spent about 6 months trying to pretend like I knew everything. I felt like I was working in a fishbowl, and I wanted everybody to think that I understood it all. And finally, someone so kindly pulled me aside and said, Adam, it's okay to ask questions. We know you don't know anything. And so when you create an onboarding plan and job rotation, and part of it, you're taking care of, if you've joined your family company or if you're about to, there is an anxiousness. This helps to take care of that. And then lastly, introduce them to the other family employees. When I joined, my grandfather, my father, and my cousin were there, and eventually my brother would join. And when we onboarded new leaders to teams, we could have taken that idea and done it just for the family. And that would look like a morning where we sat down and each of us went around the table and talked about, well, what is Adam's job? What's Bill's job? What's Randy's job? We would go around and talk about our jobs. We used work personality profiles. You might use the Myers-Briggs, Working Genius, Strength Builders, whatever it may be. You would go through that and say, this is my personality. This is their personality. When we interact with each other at work, how do our personalities mesh or not? Actually, a couple years into working together, my father and I realized that we use the predictive index. There was a part of our personalities that was inherently at conflict. And we didn't know that for a couple of years. But when we finally looked at it and we'd worked together a while, we realized it. And then it was something that I could be aware of in our working relationship. So on board to the jobs, the personality profiles, you can even get vulnerable and share what you're strong and what you're weak at. The new family member, what are their goals going to be? How do they interact? How might they interact with other family members? Again, it's not long. It's just probably a morning. But you sit down and what you're acknowledging is that we have an inter-family business, those of us who have chosen to work here. So we're going to introduce each other to ourselves as family employees. It also may be the first time that you call each other by your first names. In onboarding a family employee or being onboarded, I would encourage you, if you've always called your grandfather Poppy, like I called mine, or your dad Daddy, or your sister, whatever your family nicknames are, as you are onboarded to the company, let it go. I called my father Randy. I called my brother Baker whenever we were doing family things. And it's just a small way to help you realize that you're not at Thanksgiving. You're not watching SEC football together. You are in a family business inside a company that's relying on you. And then thankfully, when you are watching football together, you can flip right back to dad or buddy or whatever you use. So onboarding to family employees also lets you start to professionalize your relationship. And that is our framework for hiring well. Having family hiring criteria, matching to actual jobs, not drifting into it, saying no. And then even if we get over that, being vigorously onboarded. You may have sat through this, though, and want to put this off. okay, maybe your in-laws, your cousins, your nieces, whatever, they're young. But remember, in my experience, you can never start soon enough on purposefully hiring family. The need for this kind of clarity will be on you before you know it. My sister was in high school when she got the letter from my dad, and kindergartners, you may have had this experience, kindergartners can create awkward moments by saying things like, well, mommy, will I ever be able to work with grandpa too? Having those answers earlier will help you chaos-proof your family business. And so I have found when you work on these, you may say, where do you work on them? And so as we close together, I'll tell you, we used family meetings. We may call them ad hoc, and we sometimes did them annual, did them quarterly. It depends on the rhythm of the family. Sometimes things were emailed. Sometimes there were other resources there. We use family business meetings to work out a lot of these things. I hope this episode, particularly listened to with episodes 4 and 5, have been helpful to you. 21 Clear exists to end chaos in family businesses, and we do that 2 ways. By offering dedicated family business consulting. So not looking at wealth management or strategic tax planning, but focusing on that inner family business. So with consulting services, but then also resources, and this podcast is one of them. One thing I learned in my own family's company, I led corporate strategy for about a decade as we quadrupled and went coast to coast. And I learned how hard it is to focus on the business versus working in the business. We all know that phrase. It's even harder to focus and make time for your inner family business. So my hope in this podcast is that you've gotten 20, 25 minutes just to think about how your family works together inside the company. And every time you touch a resource of 21 Clear, because we provide consulting and then resources, for however long you touch the newsletter, a LinkedIn post, and for however long you touch the book that we're going to be publishing in Q2 of next year, or this podcast, that you just get to take a breath and think about your inner family business. My hope is that it has been helpful to you. I look forward to joining you again next time. Until then, thank you so much for listening. As my grandfather would have said, thank you so very, very much.